welcome back to my channel. My name is Campbell and I live for having fun because it's super fun. I love watercolors. So guess what, my friends? In today's video, I am going to help give you confidence because I am going to show you exactly what you can do to correct your mistakes. It's not acrylic, so you can't just paint over it. And that is true. But it is not true that you can't do anything about it. So let's go over ways you can erase your mistakes. There's a lot of different things, and there's also a lot of different materials, side benefit of being a mixed media artist, that you can bring in that will ameliorate those mistakes. And guess what that does? It gives you confidence. And guess what that does? It makes you want to paint more. And what does that do? That makes you a better artist. Are you ready? All right, buckle up. We have a lot to go over today. We're going to talk about how to erase watercolors when they're still wet. And then we're going to talk about how to erase watercolors after they've dried, because it's a little bit of a different story. We're also going to be covering cover-up options. What can you do to just full-on mask over a giant mistake if you can't get it 100% off of your paper? I'm also going to be covering different techniques you can use with color pencils, pastels, watercolor markers, and also how to fix your mistakes with more watercolors. And then stay tuned to the end because I'm also going to be talking about gelatos, watercolor pencils, and Neocolor too. So there's so many options as mixed media artists that we get to employ to save our work, to rescue our mistakes. We can't always pivot and just run with it in a new direction, but there's so much you can do, and I want to make sure that you know all these things so that you can proceed with that confidence. Okay, so first of all, we're going to talk about erasing when wet and versus erasing when dry. So if you're watercoloring, you should know that the easiest, fastest, best way to erase is when your mistake is fresh and everything is really wet still. It's as simple as that. So all you need to do is be armed with your paper towels that you're probably should be arting with anyways, because you're always using your paper towels to get moisture off of your brush. And if you are super beginner and you have no idea what the right water amount is for your brush, I did a whole video on this 2 weeks ago. I will make sure to link it in the description box for you. It's exactly how to load your brush. All right, so the best and easiest way is if you make a mistake, say you're like, whoa, oh no, I went outside the lines. The best thing you can do is to get it right while it's immediately just happened. Now, some watercolors, and I use these obnoxious bright colors, okay, they're like my favorite colors, obnoxious in terms of, they are very staining. So you'll notice right away, oh crap, I didn't actually get everything off of that. So I'm going to take my wet brush and I'm going to make it damp. You don't want it soaking wet. Okay, and I'm going to squiggle all around this, and that's going to loosen up, hopefully, most of that, so I can lift it a little bit better. Have this capability. If your really soft watercolor brush isn't getting it, you can switch to a shorter bristled stiffer brush or an acrylic brush, because you need a little bit of oomph sometimes to really stir up those pigments, get them out of the paper. Gosh darn it. So when you use your paper towels, come on, you can lift them. Okay. So this one, as you can imagine, this has already had time to dry and to set. This is going to be really hard to move, which is why I'm doing this video, so we can explore our options and how well they work. Okay. You also have other options than just paper towels. Sometimes paper towels are clumsy. This one has like a design in it. So sometimes when you use it, you can see the design of your paper towel, and that's not awesome. So say I was again going out of the lines, oh no, and I took my paper towels, okay, oh, see how you can see the paper towel design? It's terrible. You might not want that. So what are your other options? You could take a cotton ball, pad, get it wet, wring the water out of it, and this can sometimes, ooh, I chose all staining ones, look at that, look how hard that is. Okay, but that can give you a better pickup without stamping in a design from your paper towels, okay? Sometimes you need to use a little bit of elbow grease, but this is a nice, cleaner look, and it doesn't give you that design. Now, you're starting to wear the paper. I'm going to stop. But you can see, you can get almost back to the original paper. Wet is your friend. Okay, so what else can you use? You can also, if you need to do a small area, you can use something like a toothpick. Where are my colors? Here they are. So again, oop, go out of the lines. Do it wet. So you can try a dry brush. Now the reason it doesn't work with a dry toothpick and it works better, this is not a toothpick, this is a Q-tip, is because you need more water on it to, again, reactivate these as much as possible, and then you can swipe them away. So for really tiny areas, you can use a Q-tip. And if none of those work, the last thing I want to show you is you can actually use a magic eraser to erase your work. Same way that you use the cotton pad, is that you're going to get it a tiny bit damp. So I'm getting it wet, then I'm wringing out all of the water. Now, you need to know something really important about the magic eraser. The magic erasers are sold in art stores and they're marketed as watercolor erasers. And then there's the actual Mr. Clean magic eraser. So what is the difference? They're actually an identical product as long as you use the classic magic eraser, but I just wanted to show you on Amazon. I bought the pack of, I'll show you what I bought. Oh, this is exactly what I have. 7 pieces. It's just 7 pieces. So it's equivalent to about 2 magic erasers, because these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little triangles and then a full size. But what you can also do is just buy a pack of 100 magic erasers for 20 bucks. And this will last you 120 years, as a matter of fact. So it's a million times cheaper if you not buy magic eraser, but buy these magic sponges. They're otherwise known as melamine sponges with no chemicals. They are really inexpensive. So you can just rip one to get your triangle, so you don't have to pay extra money for someone to pre-cut your watercolor sponges into triangles for you. So hot tip and save a bunch of money. So on our last little one, okay, this is a completely dry magic eraser. And then we have the one that was a little bit wet. This is just a little bit damp. I challenged myself again with like the hardest colors. Okay, and then you can erase, which is why they give you those triangles. But it does allow you to completely erase completely. But I think the sap green is also significantly less staining than I know this one and this one are. And just so you know, these colors are all Daniel Smith. This is sap green. This is, let me get my little swatch, ultramarine turquoise. This one on the right is Quin violet, and this one on the left is Quin purple. Just, I know some of you are like, what colors are those? So there you go. All right, so now let's try the same exact techniques, but let's try it when they're dry, because you'll see it's quite a different story. It's a lot more challenging, but don't despair when you see these results, because you'll also see by the end of this video how many dizzying array of options we have to help us. So remember, the first example was using a brush. Okay, so we're gonna re-wet the area. You have to re-wet it, because just if you take a dry brush to a dry watercolor, nothing's gonna happen. So you can add some water. This reawakens your pigments. Okay, and then you can try to lift. And you can see it does lift quite a bit. You can also re-wet again. You can do that a few times for sure. Okay, and you can see it's a lot lighter. And try the stiff bristled brush to really just gives, because it's stiff, you can really, it's almost like scraping softly. And then you can lift more that way. All right, so not getting back to this level light, but it's not bad. It could be a lot worse actually. So again, re-wet is the big key to erasing dry for all of these. Okay, the second one, I don't remember what we did for the second one. I think we used the cotton pad. I really should have better notes. I'm gonna grab another cotton pad. Okay, so we have the cotton pad. We really do need to wet this space. wet quite a bit. We got to reactivate. We have the damp cotton swab. And keep wiping. This is pretty staining, so it can lift a bit. It's not bad. Now, another thing I also wanted to try is a sanded eraser for something that is dry. Now, this is something I've not tried yet on watercolor. This is actually an eraser that's used to remove ink. So I was thinking you can probably remove watercolor if it removes ink. So I wanted to test it in this video, and it's not really that awesome. I'm trying to see if it's killing my paper, or is this all just from the eraser? This is all just from the eraser. I'm gonna say this is a no. Yeah, that's like a hard no. Oh, I'm not even gonna use it in a wet. That would just shred my paper. All right, so no on that test. I've always wanted to test that. All right, and then the last one is our magic eraser. That's just a little bit damp. And yeah, that works pretty well. You can see it's all coming off the sponge. And you can rinse this out. It's just if you've ever used a regular magic eraser, you can rinse, squeeze, and repeat. How crazy is that? That's pretty good. I'm actually gonna see how it works on my staining ones. And I actually have these out because I need to do some of my walls in my house later today. Yeah, just be wary. Don't shred your paper. But that definitely works really well. That's crazy. All right, so you do have quite powerful options. So if you go outside the lines, you can work with some little damp Q-tips if you need to get into little spaces. Or you can use your little flat, short bristle brush to oonch in here. That's what I normally do. I don't normally use the Q-tip. I like using just the edge of my brush. You can get a very precise line in there. And you can get that pretty cleaned up. All right, so before we move on to the other art supplies, I also want to cover up options, okay? So first thing you might notice is this is a nice clean strip, but what you don't see is that I actually had extended my sharper line all the way to the bottom, and then I erased it with one of these cover up options. So what is cover up option number one? It is my absolute favorite art supply. It's like top 5 of all my favorite art supplies ever. That is this Copic Opaque White. I use it for everything. Just looking around my desk, I have 1, 2, 3 bottles of it just sitting in random places, all within arm's reach. You have to be careful using it because it is like a nail polish applicator. So you do tend to get these big drips. So you have to be careful, but like you're a grown up, you can figure this out. It's not rocket science. Okay, and it does cover, it's like white out, but for your art supplies, and it covers 100%. I really love the consistency, which is why I prefer this to some other options. Okay, I have a few other options to show you that I love, and I have one that I actually have never tested before, so I'm going to test that while I'm here. All right, another very popular option for watercolorists is to use gouache. Normally they would use traditional gouache. This is just acrylic gouache, and again, it just sits on my art table because it's something I have to reach for. It's thicker consistency than my Copic. This one's my favorite consistency, and that's why I love it. But this is gouache. So acrylic gouache is permanent after it dries, which is different than traditional gouache, which is just an opaque watercolor. So I actually prefer acrylic gouache because it is opaque. Oops, my brush was really wet. Well, that's not really what you want. It has very good coverage. Now, keep in mind, it is reactivating the color underneath because I was using a wet brush. So use a dry brush. I'll do another one. Use a dry brush so that it doesn't activate as much, but it gets tricky. It really is, anything wet you put on your watercolor is gonna reactivate it. It's not my go-to, which is also why my go-to is this. It's so perfect consistency. It covers, and because it covers in one swipe, I don't need to keep swiping. That repeated swiping is what stirs up the pigments. All right, you can also use something for like a paint pen. This is a really worn paint pen, but you can always use an acrylic paint pen. This is like a super well-loved and used one by Sharpie. Posca. It's like a zillion brands of paint pens. And you can always dot. Again, you're just using it like whiteout to erase. Like this would be a good option for this little dot right here. You could just do a couple. So that hopefully gives you some like extra confidence to know, oh, if I can't wipe it out, at least I could, you really genuinely can cover over it. Why not? We're mixed media artists. That's what I wanted to test. This, God, Copic does everything right. So this is basically in pen form what my favorite ink bottle is. Oh yes. This one I can see the ink showing through. Maybe it's starting. But not too shabby, not too shabby. See how this is the actual whole white of the paper? That's because I was using this Copic White. Now this isn't available in a lot of places in Europe, in which case I recommend this one. My best friend Lucy Bryden, who's an artist, lives in Scotland, and this is what she uses. She uses bleed proof white. I don't love this as much. This is like completely dried out. I think just because of it's in a jar, whereas these ones, I actually use them up before they have a chance to dry out, and they just seem a little bit more airtight in that container. All right, keep your eyes peeled for other items that you could use. You could use a China marker. There's so many whites. You could do a white ink, which also has similar, this one doesn't have a brush, this has like an eyedropper, but test. I'm sure you have lots of things in your arsenal that would work. All right, cover-up options. That is really makes you hopefully feel a lot more confident. Okay, in this part of the video, let's talk about how you can fix your mistakes using other art supplies. This is where mixed media is the bomb, because we don't have to be so hyper concerned about a true watercolorist wouldn't be using other art supplies. Then it's not, we don't care about that. We're like, let's have some fun and fix our mistakes using whatever we have around. So my favorite art supply to couple with watercolors are just colored pencils. They're, you know, they're cheap, they're everywhere, they're easily accessible. So what I did for these samples is I made an example where there's a hard line and we want to soften it. That's probably the most common thing that needs fixing in a watercolor piece, is like trying to soften this edge. So we're going to do that using these different art supplies. Another thing you might want is to make a hard edge out of a soft one, like you accidentally have a bleed and you want it to be hard. That's super easy. And then the third one that is probably even more common than this top one is like just filling in maybe some incomplete areas. So I was going to use all of them and just show you. For the colored pencil, again, if we want to soften this, how would I approach this? First of all, you need to go and sample a bunch of your art supplies and make sure you have colors that match. So you would take your colored pencils. Okay, I usually do like small circles. Now, if you have been following me for any amount of time, you will know I actually detest colored pencils because you really need to do like 1,000 layers and to build them up to make them look super good. And I literally am really lazy. And I don't like to spend 7,000 hours doing really anything. But why it's okay, and they are my go-to for fixing watercolor mistakes, is that your watercolors are already giving you the base normally. Now here I'm doing something a little bit different, which is like kind of color matching. But if you can use the colored pencils, and this will become apparent in the last one, especially when we're using it to fill in, you can use it to just help yourself in different areas. Now there's a little bit of green in here, which I haven't captured with just the 2 colors that I have, but you get the idea. I'm using these small circular motions, and you can help Ease the transition of one to another. Now, the only thing, the drawback that I don't care for is that colored pencils leave a lot of texture behind. And that's why I also wanted to show you all of these other art supplies, because if you're like, oh yeah, that is not gonna fly, then you have so many other options. So that is creating that transition. I didn't also have the exact colors of my pan pastels. So what I did also do is grab, I do have an exact color for a pastel pencil. So pastel pencils are another great art supply and tool in your mixed media arsenal that you might have already, and you might not have thought to couple them with your watercolors, but they make a great pairing, and you can absolutely use them to help each other out. This is the hardest one when you're going from a hard edge to a soft. It is definitely the hardest. But I still wanted to mention it because you never know. You might be in this situation. The other an art supply that I like to use and couple with my watercolors is a watercolor marker. So I have a lot of reviews on these. I'm like a marker hoarder. These were great because they are wet. They do activate the watercolors underneath them, but they're really watercolors. So you could like just, this is probably working the best for this example. They also reactivate beautifully, so they blend in with your watercolors already format, which is like, how cool is that? Okay, and then the last is when you're using watercolor to fix watercolor. So this is like the only option if you're a true watercolor fine artist. You would probably fall over if you thought people were using other instruments along with it. So there's a couple things you can do for this hard edge. You can actually just use water to really reactivate this again. Now we're not trying to erase it, we're just trying to ease that transition and kind of just get rid of the hard line. So I'm not even using watercolor, I'm just using water itself, which is an effective enough tool. I'm just stirring it up, and that's enough to help erase that super harsh line. All right, so just water. You can use just water, which is also arguably like the easiest one of all of these. But if you zoom out, you can see them to different effects. You can try like your pan pastels. You can come in here and again apply them at the line and see if you can help smooch that. All right, so those are your options. Okay, so let's talk about how to create a hard line from a soft area. This one is super easy and hopefully obvious, but you just have your color pencil. Again, if you're scared, because if you go over and do a second layer of this in watercolor, it actually changes everything. It will darken this, as you'll see. Actually, I'll do that one first. It can be scary because it does change everything that you have already. It will darken whatever you have. You might not have the same ratio that you had before, but the watercolor is the easiest, but it's not your only choice. So you could do just watercolor pencil. So this is really quick and it's just a really nice option because you might be scared to go back in with your watercolors. And remember, being scared is what is impeding our confidence level, which gets in the way of us creating. So I hope it's super helpful to be like, oh yeah, I have some colored pencils. I can go and use that to make a hard edge. And look at it, like blends really nicely with my watercolors that I already have there. If you're worried about the texture, you could do the colored pencils over all of it, and then you could make the texture match. Okay, so colored pencils, beautiful transition. The second one are those pan pastels. I am not a pan pastel expert. I have them all, but I don't use them very much, so excuse me. And I know this is actually a hot pressed as well. But again, but I just, like a lot of people have soft pastels or pastel pencils, pan pastels, but ooh, so quick and easy. And I do love pan pastels over watercolor because they blend and you don't have that ugly texture that sometimes the color pencils can give you. All right, watercolor marker, super cinch, right? You just draw and talk about hard edge. If you want a very clear hard edge, you can just color right with these, but they do marry well with your watercolor, and you can blend them in if you want using a little bit of water. All right, so awesome watercolor besties, you bet. All right, so the last one is filling in any awkward gaps. Again, I'm sure this is super obvious by now, but you can also use this to add shading. This is a great way to add shading in your project. This is in my whimsical watercolor series. For my Widow Women book, this is how I use colored pencils to add shading. So you would just use a darker color of colored pencil in a matching shade to whatever was there before. But then I can also use it to add shading and more dimension. And if you already have a solid thing filled with watercolors, the colored pencils are like so easy peasy on top. It works extremely well. So my Widow Women book, this is the main way that I add the shading in that super popular book. All right, so you can use colored pencils. Amazing way to fill in and shade. Okay, awesome possum. Pan pastel. Pan pastels come in like a zillion colors. Again, it's a great, I have some magenta on my thing, so it's really muddy looking. I should have grabbed a clean applicator. Same thing, you don't get as quite a fine line. They're fuzzy. But if you're careful and you have them, you can also add shading and depth, and you don't have the yucky texture of the colored pencils. All right, so pan pastels, great for filling in and shading. Watercolor markers, same idea. You can, because you have a nice applicator tip, you have a brush nib. These are the Faber-Castell ones. I also have the Winsor Newton ones. You can like outline this super carefully. So if you want a really crisp line around the edge, how nice is that? So nice. Okay, now it's a little bit darker. Maybe you could blend it in. You could take your water and run it along the sides. Whee! It intermingles with your paint anyways. So we're filling in all the gaps, and we can use water to blend them together. So really nice. I really struggle with fine motor, so having markers is always like my backup. Does a really nice job of helping you out there. And then of course you can also just use more watercolor. Okay, and so if you do have some tiny brushes, I just really struggle with a tiny watercolor brush. I'm just not good at it. So I would rather reach for these other supplies. It's a super personal thing, but that's also why I'm bothering to go through all of your different possibilities, because you might have a weird personal thing too, where like you are obsessed with pan pastels and want to know how you can use them more, or you hate pastels because it's like a gross textural thing and you don't want to use them, but you also have struggled with a small brush, so that's why you need to know about colored pencils or whatever. All right, so those are great additions to your watercolors. All right, last but not least, what else could we use? You're a mixed media artist. You have so many things at your fingertips. So what else can we use? Luckily, you can use so much. All right, so gelatos, if you don't know what gelatos are, they're a form of a gel stick. Here are two other kinds of gel sticks. This is a gelato. Weirdly, I don't have one in this color, which is so bananas. That's pretty close. So the wondrous thing about gel sticks and gelatos is that they are also water soluble. Okay, and they blend so beautifully. So you can use them dry. I just like to mash them with my finger, to be honest. So you can get rid of the ugly texture with just your finger. You can full on wet them. I don't like to. Okay, so I'm using 3 different brands all in the same time to make this lovely turquoise value scale. And these are amazing to work over or with watercolors. You can mix them all together. The downside of these is they're huge nibs, so forget doing any detail work, you just can't. But they're they're like lipstick. I have a whole video on these if in case you're not familiar. I just love them. Gelatos are my favorite of all the gel sticks because they're not as water reactive as the other ones. And so I like that they blend beautifully, but they're not as, yeah, they're just not as prone to moving. If I want to throw a sealer and get like really messy mixed media, they don't move quite as much, which I actually find to be a plus. Okay, another thing that you can use are watercolor pencils. So this is the same effect as the regular color pencil. So you could totally use these and not activate them. Hopefully that's obvious. That would be the same beautiful effect. This is an Inktense pencil. So Inktense, the difference is that these are permanent when dry, and a regular watercolor pencil isn't permanent when dry. But what I like about watercolor pencils over watercolors is that you can get rid of that ugly texture. Clean brush going on here. When you activate these with water, okay? So it's like watercoloring on top of your watercolors gorgeously, but you lose a little control because it doesn't have the like more consistent application than your watercolors, but super amazing if you want to add some details and then you're like, sometimes I'm like, ooh, like that's too much and I will just use the water to blend. So watercolor pencils are an amazing choice. Another super amazing choice is our Neocolor 2s. Okay, and the thing that all of these things have in common is that they're all water reactive. So you have the ability to add water to, again, eliminate that texture if you don't like it. But you could use these also for blending, shading, fixing. This is a Neocolor 1, which are identical looking as Neocolor 2, but they are not water soluble. So, which are fair game. Like you can also use them, but they do leave a ton of texture behind, more so even than the color pencils, which is why I didn't include them on this chart, but you absolutely could use these over watercolors for sure. Just if you don't love that texture, you won't be able to get rid of it. All right, let me go grab my Neocolor 2s so you can see the difference. Oh, no wonder I was confused. These are my Neocolor 1s and these are my Neocolor 2s, and I didn't realize they look identical to one another. So let me grab the green out of here, but we can add on, oh, maybe I do. Okay, so here is the Neocolor 2. Here's some darker. And then when you add the water, again, hater of texture, you can add water. I don't use these very much because what you'll notice is that you get these streaks. So you can eliminate like the texture, but sometimes you end up with a new texture. So it's a little bit less predictable and less controllable, but it's an amazing option. Isn't that really crazy? Like how many different tools you can use to fix, help, you can erase. So I hope this video is hugely helpful and you learn some new things, and the fact that you can erase, and if you can't erase, you can cover. Amazing. So if I've forgotten a bunch of things, can you do me a favor genuinely and put them in the comments section for everyone? I'm sure there's a ton of other ideas and art supplies that people use to correct their mistakes. Maybe there might even be products that you can use to lift things off that I've never heard of before. So everyone go to the comment section and peruse, and maybe we can learn off of one another a little bit more. All right, I would love that. Okay, next week I'm gonna be back and I'm gonna be talking about highlights because I'm freaking obsessed, and I want to share with you everything that I'm obsessed with because I don't know, it's fun, and maybe you'll learn something new and maybe you'll try something new, but you really cannot highlight too much in my humble opinion. I will see you next Wednesday. Subscribe. Okay, bye.